I'm Martez Reed, Director of Technical Marketing with Morpheus Data. In this session, we're going to walk through the automation aspects of the Morpheus platform. So infrastructure automation, core aspect of the Morpheus platform. So being able to leverage the platform to automate infrastructure, whether it be utilizing things like infrastructure as code, platform supports integrations with CloudFormation, ARM templates, as well as HashiCorp Terraform from an infrastructure as code perspective, but also integrates with various automation tools, whether it's scripting to configuration management tools within the space. So there's a number of use cases for automation. Here's just a small handful of things that you could use automation for in an enterprise IT environment. Workload lifecycle management, core aspect of the Morpheus platform, being able to leverage it for provisioning of workloads, tying into those workloads, Day-2 management, decommissioning, starting to also look at periphery aspects of IT operations. So things like network automation, storage automation, application deployment, also look at aspects in which you can leverage it for cloud operations to manage cloud environments as part of the ongoing hygiene of those environments, user management, provisioning, management, decommissioning, number of use cases. So question becomes, what's the platform where I can run those from? So that's where Morpheus really looks to provide that value. Oftentimes it's a script here, a script there, some automation here, some automation there, and there's no unified platform to be able to run those from in IT environments. And so that's where we look to provide that value. So when we look at the Morpheus automation and take an overview, a number of the aspects really start to stick out as it relates to where we can start to get the information from and how we can leverage that as part of our automation solution. So when we start looking at the bottom portion, platform features, these are things that are actually just core to the Morpheus platform itself that the automation is taking advantage of or piggybacking on. So things like the single sign-on, being able to interact with it from a multi-tenant standpoint. Maybe there's different groups within the enterprise that might want some further delineation in terms of their automation needs between other groups. Role-based access control, we took a look at in the previous session. Git integration, so being able to pull that code from source control, let it live in source control. We're going to bring it down. We're going to execute it as part of the process. Secrets management. Platform does include a native secrets management capability referred to as Cypher for those organizations that may not have stood up HashiCorp Vault yet or looking for something to stick some information, stick some sensitive information or details. Morpheus Cypher is a great solution to be able to enable that. Audit logging. We're automating stuff. We want a record of what's happening, when it's happening. High availability. So we talked about the platform being able to be deployed in a highly available manner, as well as a command bus. So the command bus provides a really interesting functionality, in particular for Ansible. So organizations often run Ansible. For those that are familiar with Ansible, agentless typically requires SSH or WinRM to be able to access the box or the node. The Morpheus agent facilitates a command bus interaction in which we can remove that requirement. So via our command bus, so essentially the agent is opening up an outbound connection from the node to the Morpheus appliance. And then through that connection, we're actually executing the Ansible so that there is no need for the SSH or the WinRM access into that box. Integrations. So there's a handful listed here. There's quite a few more than this, but Ansible, Ansible Tower, Bash, Chef, Puppet, Python, PowerShell, VRO. Unified platform that can have hooks into these various automation tools and technologies. One of the challenges that enterprises typically face is Group A is using a different tool than Group B. Group C is using a different tool than both of those. And oftentimes there's a tools rationalization conversation. Hey, everybody, let's get down to the same tool set. Oftentimes that doesn't go very well. Being able to leverage the tool that's best for the team, for the purpose, is where we see a lot of value. But certainly if the organization wants to get down to a single tool or tool sets, certainly more power to them. And then abilities or the ways to be able to trigger the automation from the platform, being able to utilize ITSM. So we have a ServiceNow integration in which our catalog items can be presented up to ServiceNow and trigger those from within ServiceNow into the platform. REST API, which we talked about, CLI, the service catalog native to the Morpheus platform, being able to schedule those or run the automation task on a scheduled basis, and then being able to run them from the admin UI. So quick overview of concepts or constructs within the Morpheus platform. We have automation tasks, which are hooks into automation. So think Ansible playbook or Python script, your shell script, bash script. We also have the ability to aggregate those into what we term as workflows. Two types of workflows: provisioning workflows, which are tied to the lifecycle of a node or workload. So think a virtual machine. We're leveraging our automation in various phases of that workload's lifecycle. And then operational workflow, which doesn't have to be tied to the lifecycle of a given workload. So think I have a Python script that I just want to run. I can leverage the operational workflow for that. And as I mentioned, provisioning workflows, various phases in which I can leverage it. One of the big benefits is the ability to be able to mix and match the automation that I'm running in those various different phases. So in this example, I've got 2 Ansible playbooks, a bash script, and a Python script. The various different capabilities that offers is really powerful when you start thinking about organizations in their automation journey. Is oftentimes we're moving from this to that, or we're maturing it, or sometimes, dare I say, I've done it in the past, I get to a point where, you know what, it's a pain in the butt to get that into Ansible. Maybe I can just use a bash script because it's easier to get the job done. But how do I do that? Or I just shell out via Ansible. And so this provides that understanding, essentially, of that journey. Is aspects as I'm migrating are going to get to the Ansible playbook. Some are still going to be in the shell script, and allows me to be able to make that transition in a more seamless fashion.
Does it support running the tasks in parallel? So if I have 3 different, provisioning tasks, is it going to run all 3 of those in parallel, or is it going to do it in series? Or can I control that some way?
You want to touch on that, David?
A little bit. So it depends on what you're doing. If you're deploying like an application workload that involves 3 different virtual machines, it's going to run that in parallel.
Okay.
But you can also have situations where you have tasks that do need to run in sequence, and that will automatically happen as you organize those.
Okay, so you can control which format it's doing it. So if you know there's a dependency between them, okay, I'm going to run them in serial to respect that dependency.
Or if you have 2 separate workflows attached, those typically can also sometimes run in parallel too.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah, you can also do variable chaining, but I'll let Martez.
Yep, moving data between one phase to another phase, between the automation. And as I mentioned, operational workflows, the ability to be able to also tie those together with various types of automation in a single workflow. And one thing to note is the ability to specify execution targets. So in the case of my Python script, I don't want to run it against the workload. Morpheus platform provides the ability to be able to run a Python script from the platform in an isolated environment. So think a scenario where I might want to, let's say as an example, deploy a MongoDB database. I want to leverage Ansible running against the node or the VM itself to install MongoDB. But I might want to run a Python script to, as an example, integrate with HashiCorp Vault to facilitate the dynamic credentials for that database as part of the process. Really powerful capability that the platform provides from a functionality standpoint.
So is there a way to pass some variables from a stage to another, or every stage are isolated one from each other?
Yes. So there's the ability to be able to pass data between the various stages of the workflow.
When you say that it runs it in an isolated environment, if I wanted to launch that Python script, what do you mean it runs in an
isolated Python environment? One of the roadmap items is the ability to be able to run those in a containerized environment.
Okay.
If you want potentially more isolation, depending on how you view that.
So it's creating a virtual environment for Python specifically, and then running it from that context.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, demo time. So we're going to take a look at a couple of examples. We're going to take a look at the self-service capabilities from a Day-2 standpoint. So an end user comes into the platform. Can they be able to run a given task against their own workload that they own? The ability to be able to run ad hoc, more of the administrator-focused aspect, whereas an admin, I need to run a given task or a given workflow. Then take a look at scheduled operational workflows. And then finally, self-service operational workflows from the platform perspective. So let's jump into our environment and take a look at what we're doing here. So after I've deployed a workload within the Morpheus environment, I can take a look at a number of things as it relates to instances. So I will pull up my instance here. Let's take a look at this, which I don't have permission to. Let's see. Let's grab this Apache instance. So from an automation standpoint, I can run a task or I can run a workflow against that particular workload. In this particular case, I've got a Ansible playbook I want to run against the particular workload. It is a tech marketing Ansible Day-2 operation. So I'm going to run that one. So it's going to do is it's going to start running the Ansible playbook against that workload. In this particular example, it is a very basic example where it's running the Ansible playbook and creating a simple text file on the file system. But certainly it can be something more complex as it relates to what's being leveraged or facilitated. There's the ability to run a task, which is the single piece of automation, or the ability to be able to run a workflow, which is potentially an aggregate of various tasks within the platform. So let's also take a look at what we refer to as ad hoc. So I'm an admin. I want to run a particular operation within the Morpheus platform to do some admin stuff. So in this example, I have a Python script for helping me clean up my AMIs. One of the things that we see are various contexts. So I can run it in context of workloads or outside the context of various workloads. So we've triggered the Python script. It's running. Of course, I've got some previous examples before, but what it allowed me to do is run that Python script from a centralized platform. Certainly a number of ways in which I can run this. I'm an admin, so I ran it from here. We'll take a look at in a second, being able to do that in a self-service fashion. So in addition to that, I also have the ability to schedule particular actions within the platform via jobs. And so I could come in and I could create a particular job as part of the process, and I could tie either a task or a workflow as part of the process. So when we think about, especially in particular, things like cloud hygiene or maintaining cloud environments, there's often a need to run certain tasks on a scheduled basis. And so being able to leverage Morpheus's automation integrations, as well as being able to schedule those on a daily or weekly basis, becomes very powerful. It also gives me visibility from a centralized platform into those various automations. A lot of the challenge that I've seen is oftentimes there's automation in the CI/CD pipeline, or it's in this repo, or it's over here, or it's over there, and trying to get an understanding of the big picture becomes a little bit challenging. So then I can specify when I want to run it. We have execution schedules that I can create to specify, you know what, every night, every month, at the end of the month, whatever it might be, as well as potentially just some point in the future. I might want to run a given task, whether it's something like an upgrade task, where I might say, you know what, we're having our change window next Saturday. I want it to run then at this given point in time to be able to facilitate that process. And so in addition to the Python example I mentioned, I can run that in the context of given workloads. So I might want to say, you know what, I want to run an Ansible playbook against these handful of nodes at this particular time. There's the ability to do that from the Morpheus platform. And then we talked about self-service. So let me switch to the full self-service persona. So I might say, as an example, have granted the ability to create an AD user to a user in the environment. So when you think about the self-service functionality and capability, oftentimes the story is a more junior individual. For me, it's the ability to be able to offload that request from the automator. So let's say, even if we're both peers, what I'm now able to do is you don't have to come to me with that request that says, hey, Martez, I need you to run this or do that. Even though we're both peers, it's not that I'm smarter than you. It's that I've been more entrenched in this particular piece of automation. And so what that does is alleviates me having to facilitate that request. And so I can now come in and enter in the handful of options and then ultimately submit that request. Automation kicks off and starts to run as part of the process as well. So major capability there. And the last thing I'll touch on in terms of the pure automation is the provisioning workflows that we talked about. So as I mentioned, two types of workflows. So the provisioning workflow is tied to the life cycle of a workload. And so Common example from a core use case of the platform is provisioning virtual machines or instances. And so being able to leverage automation tasks as part of that process is really powerful. So various different phases that have different information in terms of what's passed into the actual automation itself, and being able to, once again, mix and match that functionality and that modality.
Can be used also during Kubernetes cluster creation, like take deliver some components from after the cluster creation is complete. For example, Flux for GitOps or something like that.
Yeah, so there's the ability to be able to tie automation to the cluster provisioning, leveraging the Morpheus automation engine.
Instead of using like a time that you want a task to execute, is there an option for event-driven tasks or like a webhook?
It's a great question, Ned. So that is a roadmap item that we're working towards, is the ability to be able to ingest events, both from outside the platform as well as various aspects inside the platform. So things like monitoring within the platform, be able to run those auto remediation tasks. So certainly a great, powerful item that we're looking at.
All right.
So Alexa driven.
Sure. Well, technically you could do Alexa driven right now. Alexa, hit the API endpoint and away it goes.
What could go wrong?
Make it so.
All right, so now we're going to shift gears a little bit to infrastructure as code. So Terraform, Morpheus platform really looks to provide a self-service capability from a platform standpoint. So let's jump to a quick slide. So for those that are familiar with Terraform, oftentimes this is the process for spinning up infrastructure utilizing Terraform. Utilizing a CI/CD pipeline. In this example, I'm using GitLab as my source control and Jenkins as my CI/CD server to facilitate the deployment. Certainly could be Azure DevOps for those that hate Jenkins, but it's a personal preference. So typically what's going to happen is Jenkins is going to call the open source version of Terraform or effectively reach out to something like Terraform Cloud. Then oftentimes the scenario is integrating with Ansible to facilitate configuration at the OS level if you're deploying virtual machines or instances. One of the challenges that I've seen is how do I enable this at scale utilizing self-service? Those that have gone through the process, oftentimes the challenge is if I needed to create or replicate an environment that you had built out, how do I do that? Oftentimes it's, do I need to create a new CI job? Do I need to create a new Git repo? Do I need to fork your repo? Oftentimes there's the full process of, hey, I just want to run what somebody else is running. And the challenge is when we start talking about, especially nowadays, is the skills gap. There's a lot to learn as organizations are moving to the cloud. And oftentimes Terraform isn't technically a requirement of everyone's job that actually needs to use cloud infrastructure. And so how do I deliver that scale in a self-service fashion? Morpheus platform can help deliver that. There's a ServiceNow integration. Oftentimes organizations are utilizing and leveraging ServiceNow as the front-end request portal for all IT resources. Morpheus has an integration with that. ServiceNow can call Morpheus. Morpheus can then facilitate the provisioning of Terraform in a self-service fashion to be able to do things like native state management, to be able to facilitate that process, as well as be able to integrate with things like source control or Git to pull down that Terraform code as part of the process. So let's take a look. So here we have I can spell VPC. Morpheus has single sign-on.
And a timeout of functionality, apparently.
Showing you all the goodies. So as a basic example, I want to provision a VPC from the Morpheus platform. And so as a user, I don't care that it's Terraform. I don't care that it's Python scripts. I don't care that it's native integrations into AWS. I just care about getting my VPC or my environment, whatever that environment might be. I can specify a handful of options, things like name, as well as cost center. So these have been created as part of the process of the administrator, being myself, created the catalog item for the user, which is still myself, to be able to deploy into this environment utilizing Terraform. So I can specify a name, specify a cost center, and then click order now. And through TV Magic, we've got one that is already ordered, I believe. Let's see if I can get to it. VPC. All right, and so it's actually Terraform. There's no smoke and mirrors here. So there's some Terraform going on here. And so the platform provides the ability where I would click order now, and I get information in terms of the Terraform. And so what we're doing is the native state management. So the state is stored and encrypted in the Morpheus database, simplifies that process of how do I do it in a self-service fashion? Typically what's going to have to happen is I'm going to have to somehow figure out how to tell the user how to modify the path to specify where their state should be stored and facilitate that process. So in addition to that, the platform provides the ability in terms of information and insights into state. So things like drift detection. So there's a little drift status. If the actual state were to drift away from what the intended state is, we would be able to see that there is a difference between the two. I can do things like be able to apply state in this case. What it's actually going to do is run me through the inputs that I specified as part of the process. So what we saw from the service catalog was some of these options were hidden, but now I could make a change. Let's say for some reason I wanted to change cost center. I could run through the process. And what it's doing now is actually running Terraform on the back end, starting to validate that my change is legit. And so eventually it's going to give me the output of the Terraform plan to be able to say, yes, this looks good or this doesn't look good. So we can see that there are 12 changes to be made. What it's doing is simply changing the tag on all of the resources because I changed the cost center. So I'll click complete, and away it's going to go start provisioning that particular, those changes as part of the process.
So you're holding the state in Morpheus and you're holding the variable values in Morpheus as well.
Yes,
So all that information is stored somewhere.
correct.
And the actual configuration, is that hooked to something that's sitting in source control?
That is
So-
something that's sitting in source control.
Okay, so yeah, if I'm the maintainer of this VPC catalog item and I wanted to add some functionality or make a change, I could do that in source control and make that update. And now anybody who's consuming it will see that change available.
Yep. And once that happens, what's going to happen is the application is going to run a refresh, and then I'm going to get a drift detection,
Okay.
the drift between what you intended for it to be and what it actually is at the moment. So platform supports 90 plus codeless integrations. There's a Git integration to enable the integration to Git. And then what I also did was specified an app within the platform to simplify the integration. There we go. So this maintained the integration. So I specified the source control integration, specified the branch or the tag, or really the Git reference, specified the working path, and then we also specified some secrets to be able to integrate with the cloud. There's a number of ways those secrets can be provided. In this case, the access key secret key. I could tie it to this blueprint, or I could also tie it to a cloud integration within the platform. So whenever a user goes to deploy to a given cloud, if I expose that option, what will happen is it'll leverage those credentials that are tied to that given cloud.
And those credentials are stored statically in Cypher.
Yes, they can also be stored in HashiCorp Vault or Thycotic, or insert your integration of choice,
So
or leverage an IAM role.
I could potentially have it dynamically generate credentials for each provisioning job.
Potentially. You have to run into the issue of how long though those credentials live, and there's a bit of nuance there, but yes.
From you just talked about the Git integration in Terraform. We talked about it a bit ago. So do we have, obviously from a Terraform state perspective, are you storing state in Git as well? Or is that an option? Because obviously for known reasons, I may or may not want that. So let me stop there first.
Yes, so state is not stored in Git. State is
Okay,
stored
just
in
the
your Morpheus
config.
database.
Okay. But as far as state, do I have an option to offload that somewhere else as well? Maybe like a console cluster or some other alternative? Or is it just intended that it's going to stay in the Morpheus database, which is fine, just purely from what are my options?
So there's two options there. It kind of depends. It depends on what Terraform providers you have set up. Like if you have the external state stuff set up for Terraform, you can technically offload it like to S3 still.
So
Even if you do
said
that,
you said you could offload it to Terraform Cloud.
I haven't done it to Terraform Cloud before. I probably can.
Okay.
But Morpheus also will maintain a copy because it asks you to check for drift and to represent it. So it kind of depends on that front.
Okay.
It's often best to let Morpheus be that source.
Sure. Yeah, I'm just thinking about it from the perspective if I'm doing this on-prem and I've got some scenario that potentially causes me an issue where that state may disappear, then I need to have a different, another alternative location that I might want to store that.
You know, the architecture, probably the infrastructure side of it, like high availability of the environment, how is that actually in terms of sizing or in terms of deployment? What's the process of deploying it in the high availability configuration, but also what the footprint looks like, what should the connectivity should be between the sites? How do you deploy a high availability infrastructure for this?
I can pull up a visual with that. There's a visual representation that I'll pull up really quick. So this is the kitchen sink. This is if you want to go full HA. We offer multiple ways to do this. You can actually deploy the services individually. Normally they're in those color-coded sections there, the search tier, the queue tier, the database. Or you can also do what we call a 3 or 5 node, where you have all of those services on 3 VMs or 5 VMs or more. You can actually scale it out as long as it's not a number. And basically that's because we have consistent scaling schemes with Rabbit, Elastic, and Percona Galera cluster. So those are very easy to scale out that way. We normally, from a sizing perspective, a 4-core 32 gig of RAM all-in-one can handle about 10,000 workloads. That's where it goes about to its limit. And that's been some heavy testing and scaling to be able to get it to that far. So, and it is a pretty linear scale. So as you add more nodes, you do get that linear. Like if you go to 2, you get 20,000. If you go to 3, you get 30,000. So I'd probably only do 20,000 because if you do 30, you can't handle a failure. So that's how that works.
When you say workloads, you're talking VMs, Kubernetes clusters.
Correct.
And the odd number of appliances, they need to be deployed between 2 sites, or I mean, how do you normally do?
If you're doing a multi-site deployment, you typically want 3 sites. Similar situation. You got to handle the who's going to elect what the master is, things like that. These are pretty common with the Elastic and the Rabbit and the Galera. That's really our limitation there. The layers above that are pretty much stateless. So you can actually scale out the web or application tier as much as you want, regardless of the database stack. So you'll often see some customers in public clouds do Amazon's OpenSearch instead of Elasticsearch. You'll see Aurora DB, and you'll see their RabbitMQ service, and that's all handled as part of the cloud native.
What performs the web load balancing there?
Sorry?
What performs load balancing across multiple nodes?
It's actually that icon represented here.
Yeah.
That's just any load balance you want. It can be an HA proxy. It can be an F5. That's up to you.
Okay.